Yeshua gave one sign, just one, the single proof he offered that everything he claimed about himself was true. Matthew 12:40, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, 3 days and 3 nights. His own words, his own sign, his own promise. Now count Good Friday on your fingers, crucified Friday afternoon, buried before sunset Friday, tomb found empty before sunrise Sunday, Friday night, Saturday, Saturday night, that's it. That's the whole window. 1 full day, 2 nights, not 3 of each, not close. A promise Yeshua staked his entire identity on, and the most common timeline in the world doesn't come close to keeping it. Welcome back. One quick note if you're new here, I use the name Yeshua throughout this channel instead of Jesus. It's simply the original Hebrew name. Behind the English one, we've got a full video on exactly why. If you want it, links below. Same person, same claim. We're just using the name he actually answered to. Today, we're going to solve this properly, not soften it, not explain it away, solve it. Because once you actually lay every piece of the text side by side, there's exactly 1 week that fits all of them, and it isn't the one on your calendar. Here's where the Good Friday tradition runs into its first real problem. Mark 16:1. When the Sabbath was passed, the women bought spices. Luke 23:56. They returned and prepared spices and rested on the Sabbath according to the commandment. Read those side by side. Mark has the women buying spices after a Sabbath has already ended. Luke has them preparing spices and then resting on a Sabbath. Both cannot be describing the same single day. Something is being missed, and it isn't a contradiction in the text. It's a contradiction in the assumption that there was only one Sabbath that week. John hands you the answer directly, John 19:31. Because it was the preparation day, the Jews didn't want the bodies to remain on the cross during the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day, not the ordinary weekly Sabbath. The Feast of Unleavened Bread opens with its own commanded rest, Leviticus 23:7, a holy convocation, no customary work, regardless of what day of the week it lands on in a given year, which means that particular week had 2 separate Sabbaths, the feast's own commanded rest day and the regular 7th-day Sabbath a couple of days later. Once you see that, everything else falls into place at once. Burial happens right before sunset on the day Scripture calls the preparation day, before the high day begins. The high day itself, a full day of rest, no work, matching the feast's command. Then a working day in between the day the women bought and began preparing their spices, matching Mark. Then the regular weekly Sabbath, the day Luke says they rested according to the commandment. Then the first day of the week, when the tomb is already empty before dawn, 2 Sabbaths, not a contradiction, a calendar. Now run the days and nights against that calendar instead of against Friday. Burial right before sunset on a Wednesday. Night 1 begins immediately Thursday, the high day, the first full day in the tomb. Night 2, Friday, the day of preparing spices. The second full day, night 3, Saturday, the weekly Sabbath. The third full day, and as that Sabbath ends, as the next day begins at sunset by the Hebrew reckoning, he rises, found already empty by the women arriving while it's still dark early on the first day of the week, Wednesday night, Thursday day, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday day, 3 nights, 3 days. Exactly what he said, not roughly, not in a loose cultural way of counting, exactly. Good Friday isn't just a tradition with shaky footing, it's a timeline that cannot produce the sign Yeshua promised, no matter how you count it. The Wednesday timeline is the only one that can, so if the day of the week got moved, it's worth asking an even bigger question. What about the date itself? Because here's what almost nobody realizes about Easter. The early church didn't just misplace which day of the week the resurrection happened on. A church council on purpose moved the entire holiday off the calendar it was always supposed to run on. For the first few centuries, believers who kept the resurrection at all kept it tied to Passover, Nisan 14, the same fixed date on the same Hebrew calendar we've walked through this whole channel. Some churches kept it on that date every single year, whatever day of the week it fell on, exactly the way Passover itself had always worked. Then, in 325 AD, the Council of Nicaea settled the argument. and not in favor of the Hebrew calendar. The ruling was explicit. Easter would be calculated independently on Christian terms, not according to Nisan as the Hebrew calendar reckoned it. The believers who insisted on keeping the actual biblical date, Nisan 14, were the losing side of that vote, and church history remembers them as a controversy to be corrected rather than a position to be respected. What replaced it is the formula most churches still use today: the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Not a fixed date, not Yahweh's calendar, a brand new calculation built specifically so the date would stop being tied to Passover at all. The day of the week was moved. Then the date itself was deliberately detached from the very calendar Scripture actually uses. Two separate corrections, centuries apart, both moving the resurrection further from the text. And then there's the name. The Venerable Bede, writing in the 8th century, recorded exactly where the English word Easter came from. Eostre, a goddess the pagan Anglo-Saxons honored with feasts during a month already named after her, Eostermanath, months before anyone attached a resurrection to that season. Archaeologists have since found well over 100 votive inscriptions to related goddess figures from the 2nd and 3rd centuries, so this isn't a myth invented to make a point. It's a documented pre-Christian name worn by a Christian holiday that already had a perfectly good name of its own, Passover. Eggs and rabbits followed the exact same pattern. Fertility symbols tied to spring's return, present in cultures that had never heard of an empty tomb, absorbed into the season the same way evergreens and mistletoe were absorbed into December. Here's what I want you to walk away with. We've already spent an entire series on this channel walking through Passover and Firstfruits, the actual appointed times Yahweh set on his own calendar, the ones the resurrection lines up with precisely down to the hour, without anyone needing to invent a new formula centuries later. The sign Yeshua gave only works on one timeline. The date only lines up with Scripture on one calendar, and the name doesn't belong to either one. None of that means the resurrection isn't real. It means the resurrection doesn't need Good Friday, and it doesn't need Easter to be true. It already had a date. Yahweh said it before anyone in Rome ever voted on a replacement. Tell me honestly, which piece hit hardest? The math that Good Friday can't actually produce 3 days and 3 nights, the council that voted to move the date off Passover on purpose, or the name itself? I'd genuinely like to know where you land.